What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York, calling from the quarantine zone again, and this time we are here with Emil of the Almighty Terminalist. Thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you here.
Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Yeah, it's so awesome to have you here. So the new album is The Grand Acceleration, which this is an absolute just thrasher like insanity. I really want to know with the Great Acceleration, like what was the thought process behind making this album? How did this album sort of like see the light of day?
Well, I mean, do you want the long response or the sort of
You
slow one,
you could give
or
me the
the shorter
long
one?
you could give me the long one.
Well, I mean, there are many ways that I could at least try to answer that question. I mean, it sort of came about with me getting into a lot of technical progressive thrash metal. I mean, I've always been sort of a thrasher guy, but the last couple of years, it's been more prevalent. And when I eventually started to get to form a band about a couple of years ago with one of my old roommates, it just seemed quite obvious that it should be in that kind of vein. And of course, I mean, we were kind of into vector at the time, or at least I was a lot, and that seeped into the songwriting in many ways. And there's something about that, just that rush that's of the technicality and the speed that is in some ways essential to, at least to me, when it comes to metal. And when I later on discovered this weird niche philosophical direction called dromology from a French thinker named Paul Virilio. It just seemed very obvious. It seemed very obvious to sort of combine the two, the speedy thrash with this philosophical direction, which is very much centered around speed and is sort of an apocalyptic worldview of how everything accelerates into destruction, essentially.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you mentioned Vector because the first thing I thought of when I heard this album was kind of like Terminal Redux, that album. So it really does kind of have that like sort of progressive, death thrash element. I think it kind of has elements of Vector, but some elements of like Beneath the Remains era, Sepultura,
Mm,
and around that. And this was always the sound that you wanted to make, right? It wasn't like that you were kind of like experimenting or trying a lot of things. You just went into Terminalist knowing I wanted it to be this sound of thrash.
Well, I mean, where exactly do you think we got the name from? Now, it was kind of the idea from the start. I mean, exactly how technical, progressive, death metal leaning it should be. That always sort of comes up. It depends on the process and how it turns out. There's no real doubt that I mean, all the time I have played the guitar and writing riffs and just playing riffs. They have always been very thrashy. And what happened when I discovered Vector was that it dawned upon me that you could actually make good thrash records that were quite I mean, placed from the present era, that weren't only reaching back to the 80s and to the classics and to the classic sound, but that you could also update the thrash formula with some outside elements and bring in those prog concepts and bring in the black metal and death metal elements and make it sound really fresh, and not just as something that when goes back to a traditional thrash sound. So that was always the idea. But I'm glad that you also mentioned the Beneath the Remains era, Sepultura, and that kind of stuff, because I think it would be of course, I'm behind the album and all that, but I think it would be to narrow it down too much to say that we only sound like Vector. I also think that there are lots of other inspirations seeping through when you listen to the record.
Definitely, definitely, and I'd imagine it could also be, your metal peers in Copenhagen because I actually just interviewed couple months ago, the band Beast or Biased,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and
Or based, as we would say in Danish. Yeah.
Bass, yeah, that leave it to a band with one syllable to be like the hardest band name to pronounce. I've interviewed way too many bands that are, like have like 30 letters in their names. I can pronounce those, but I can't pronounce that one syllable name. But there's also like, and outside of thrash, but just recently I also got to interview Ghost Iris. I got to interview Cabal. So does maybe like your fellow Danish peers in the metal scene also influence you?
Of course, of course.
Like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there is. I mean, to a certain extent, we also have some Danish contemporaries that we kind of lean up against in a certain way. But a funny thing is that in Denmark, thrash has always been very popular, but you have never really had that many thrash bands. Although you even have like a classic thrash 80s thrash band, Artillery, who hail from Denmark and the Copenhagen area. I mean, it's never really been that much. There's never been that much of a scene centered around Danish thrash. So in that regard, we're actually sort of a I don't know if you would call us the sore thumb or anything, but we do differ from a lot of what is going on in the Danish metal scene and in the Copenhagen scene as well.
yeah. Well, I interviewed Artillery recently as well, and they said that like there is like a great thrash scene, but it's not. You can't like just Denmark is a small country, so like I mean, and Germany is not far, and it seems like Germany sucked all the thrash for themselves with Accept and Creator and Sodom and Destruction and all that. So
they've just been a bit ahead, you might say, in many ways, and bigger in general.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Now, you mentioned that there was sort of like a philosophy that was inspiring this album. Obviously, that determines, the lyrics and what you are going to sing about. But do you feel that, why do you feel that maybe this style of music was also the best way to, demonstrate this concept?
Well, I think that to begin with, I think that there's always something that is dependent on tradition. I guess that if you deal with a certain subject, it seems more relevant to do it in a kind of a musical form that has already dealt with the subject. When we're talking about science fiction and the future and rampant, technological advancements and all that kind of stuff, it's a bit more prevalent in thrash than it is in other metal subgenres. I mean, you of course also have the sci-fi elements in a lot of death metal, in a lot of black metal as well, or at least some cosmic elements in black metal, but it's usually in another sense. So I think one thing is tradition, another thing is the sound, for example, and there's just something about writing lyrics about speed and acceleration that makes way more sense when you play fast stuff. So in that regard, it just seems to really go together well. So of course, when you pick a concept or philosophy of sorts, that to a certain extent determines where the lyrical content should go, or at least in what direction it should be headed in. But it's been very important for us to say that the music, first and foremost, should be able to stand on its own. I mean, it's not a prog record in the sense that the music is in some way subdued to the lyrical content. I mean, you can engage with the lyrics and add another layer to the music if you want to, but it's not essential in any way. But I do think they go well together. So we haven't really. I mean, I like to say that it's not the Great Acceleration. It is not a concept record, as we know the concept record, but it's very much a conceptual record.
Well,
but how conceptual it is, depends upon how much you wanna get into it.
That terminology, I've always said it's like comparing when people say, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. It's like this album's not a concept album, but it's conceptual. Like, that's how I've compared it. Because, I'm a concept album freak. I love albums with, whether it's Steven Wilson's Hand Cannot Erase, My Chemical Romance is The Black Parade, Fear Factory, Steam Manufacturer, or Mastodon's Crack the Sky. Like, there's just something about it. But what I think is interesting is you have this very informative philosophy that will engage people into art, science, and philosophy. But you want this album to also be open to interpretation in a way, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there are multiple ways that you can always dissect and interpret music. At least in my opinion, and depending on there are probably some genres where you could say that the lyrics, they don't really matter that much. I mean, in a lot of, I don't know, I mean, in a lot of mainstream music, for example, and it's not meant as a diss to mainstream music. It's just trying to say that lyrical content in some ways is way much more about the sound of the words and the sound of the syllables and the vocals and everything, more than it's about delivering a certain message. And I do think that we have a message here, and it is conveyed in the lyrics. But of course it is open to a certain extent, although the whole worldview is kind of black, and I think it comes through pretty clearly on the record too. But we do have a little small glimpses of hope in there as well. Where there are, I mean, that's totally up to you to interpret though.
Yeah. And kind of going back to the progressive elements that are incorporated in Terminalist as well. Like, I feel like, this isn't just going to appeal to Thrash fans, as I talked about, but like, and I'm not going to just say that it has progressive tendencies because you have a song like Invention of the Shipwreck that's almost 11 minutes, or a song like Dromo Crazy that's like almost 10 minutes. Like, there is some sort of like progressive elements that I almost see fans of bands such as Obscura or even like Crystal Mountains, Sound of Perseverance, Death era as well. So was that ever an inspiration as well, like some more progressive tech death stuff as well?
Yeah, I mean, it actually is. I mean, of course, when you release a record that is only, I mean, it's only 34 and a half minutes long, and we only have 5 songs on it. Of course, some of them are gonna have to be kind of long, and when you have 2 long tracks and 3 shorter ones, which are, I mean, around 5 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes. I mean, of course, it's gonna be viewed as a prog record, to a certain extent. But I think from the response that we've gotten, it released just 5 days ago. From the response that we've gotten so far, we've been kind of overwhelmed how progressive people, how prog like people actually think it is. Because I still see, I mean, I know the long tracks are sort of a foundational element of the prog rock and prog metal genre, but still, I mean, a lot of the riffs and a lot of the stuff going on it's not that, it's very much in line with what happens in the other songs as well, in the shorter tracks, but it's just put into a form that's just spans over a way longer longer duration. So I thought, I mean, initially I sort of thought that people would still see it as being, I don't know, more thrashy than proggy, but I'm still kind of glad that that kind of more. Now you mentioned a couple of tech death bands as well, but I'm kind of glad that people recognize that there's a lot, that there's other elements seeping through as well. And I mean, I am an old, I'm not old, but I'm an old prog fan, and I've listened to, I mean, tons of prog rock records from the 70s and really fucking enjoy it and still do. So if that vibe sort of seeps through as well, I'm glad.
Yeah, I mean,
Because I love that vibe.
like I said, so the three albums that this album reminded me of: Terminal Redux by Vector, Beneath the Remains by
Mhm.
Sepultura, and The Sound of
Yeah.
Perseverance by Death. Those are the three
Oh, the
albums
sound of perseverance. Okay.
that
Yeah,
that
yeah. Well, and that makes total sense as well. But I mean, we actually have on the last song, Democracy. When we wrote that, there is a certain guitar part, around 3 or 4 minutes in, where the guitars they harmonize for a brief amount of time, and that harmonization actually came about after I had been jamming Spirit Crusher from the Sound of Perseverance, where there also is a section where Chuck Schuldiner he makes just a harmonization that sounds fucking rad. And I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna steal that, just for this little section here.
Chuck
So I mean, it totally makes sense that you can hear that inspiration there as well.
Chuck Schuldiner is was a gift from the heavy metal gods, where he came and brought us all the riffs in the world for, like, the famous religious saying, God created this so it's us to use. Well, Chuck Schuldiner created all this so it's ours to use. Thank you, Chuck Schuldiner.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chuck. And I mean, rest in power and everything. Although it's been I don't know how many years now.
20.
It's been
20. It's good.
20.
Yep, exactly 20 years around at this
Exactly
time.
20 years.
Yep, I was in first grade.
You were in first grade. Okay.
Yeah.
So now you're in 21st grade.
Yeah. You could say that, yeah. I'm done with school, thank God.
Done with school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, me too. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Although not in the lyrical content, though, we still are a bit academic there once in a while.
Yeah, well, I mean, we when we die, we graduate life.
That's true. That's true.
That was
And
dark.
as isn't it on Leprosy? I actually just listened to Leprosy the other day. There's one song there where you have the quote, "Life will never last." I think that's a Chuck Schuldiner quote as well.
Yeah. Well, he
But
also
that's I
said
mean,
in an interview that he wanted to live forever. So the King of Death had more life than 90% of the musicians I've ever met.
mm, mm,
So
true.
yeah. And the final question I wanted to ask you is, and I'm probably asking this way too in advance, but with this philosophy and this concept that you're incorporating into Terminalist now, what does the future hold in terms of not just sound, but maybe lyrical ideas that you want to explore? Do you see maybe philosophy or science almost being a subject matter that you tend to stick with, or are you going to maybe take more personal elements into Terminalist in the future, or are you going to explore different subject matters altogether?
I mean, that's a really good question, and I don't think that I can answer it in a comprehensible way. Uh, um, um, but um, I will say that the philosophy, this dromology, which is based on Paul Virilio, essentially states that the world is ruled by speed, and that speed always accelerates, and so that everything in the future will eventually sort of gather into one point of existence that will just get smaller and smaller and smaller, and that sort of acceleration and the consequences of this acceleration and the warfare techniques, the technologies of warfare that is sort of embedded in the technology and in the acceleration, the accelerated process is, I mean, I think it's very much prevalent today in our current societies and everything. And I do think that the record, although it very much is, futuristic and sci-fi in a lot of sense, in many ways, I think it still sort of holds up a mirror to some tendencies that we also see today. So I think one way to answer it would be, well, let's look at where we're at in a couple of years and see how this philosophy can be used to interpret what we see there. Another way would be to say that I still think we have many doors open from this record alone. That I mean, we have some songs that are, I mean, if we're talking sound, we have some shorter tracks where we can try to sort of gather up all our elements and see if we can sort of boil them down to just short tracks on on another record, or we can go all in on these 10-minute tracks and just proc the fuck out. Um, So you said something about the personal elements. I mean, we also have this one song on the record too called "Estranged Reflection," which is sort of. I mean, I was listening to some more, bit more gothy bands. I
Type
don't know
up.
if you're familiar with Idle Hands, who
Oh,
turned into
unto
Unto
others. That
Others.
is one of
Yeah.
the best bands. Okay, so I interviewed them twice.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay.
That album might be, I'm not even kidding, my favorite rock and roll album ever. Like, I'm not even kidding.
Whoa. Okay.
So
Co-
that's a
Speeding into cosmic overdrive there.
oh my god. Jackie might be one of my favorite songs of all time.
Okay, okay, that's really interesting because I mean they totally grabbed the hold of me too, but and I mean I think that you on that song called "Estranged Reflection" we have these kind of chorus, very 80s, almost I mean maybe not post punkish but still sort of a goth rock new wavy guitars, that was sort of I mean, it sort of came from Idle Hands onto others, but there was also this old prog thrash band called Anacrusis, an American band from the late '80s, beginning of the '90s, who explored that sort of that same similar new wave vibe with a lot of progressive thrash thrown into the mix as well. Um, so there was some inspiration coming from there, and I think it would be. I mean, personally, I think it would be interesting to explore that a bit further, and also because the sound sort of it just it doesn't really seem as obvious to make songs about speed or to write lyrics about acceleration over this sort of gothy gothy soundscape.
Hey,
I mean,
hey.
you would have
Strange
to do something more
Stranger Things
psychological, something like that.
Stranger things have been done, man. I mean, my favorite band of all time is Lacuna Coil, which has been categorized in the goth sort of thing. And I
Mm,
mean, they've always been categorized as goth from the beginning of their career to the present, but they've
mm.
incorporated a lot of elements that you wouldn't think go together with that. So you never know. Never say never.
You never know. You never know. And I'm not saying in any way that Terminalist is turning into a goth rock band or anything. I'm not.
Sure.
Just
I'm going to use this interview to
just
blackmail you.
just to make that clear. It's just to say that I actually think that we have a lot of roads to go on or to explore from this record as well. So I mean it could go about many ways. So let's see what happens. Let's see what the future holds, or what time has in store for us.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time today and for a great discussion. Everybody, we are here with Terminalist. Be sure to check out the brand new album, The Great Acceleration, out now. Pick it up. It is an absolute thrasher piece. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.